She didn't appear to be the rightful owner of a $3 million cashier's check, they alleged. That was the justification, nor the law nor the policy, but the bank manager's intuition, a white man in a sharp gray suit who avoided looking at her. He said that was standard practice. But the manner in which Here's separate story was conveyed by whispering into the phone while looking at her as if she posed a threat. After a few minutes, the lobby was quiet as she was led by two armed security officers. To be verified in a private room. Just a glass, no explanation, no warning box, and an overly loud clock ticking along. Consumers observed, some smug, others interested. In a whisper, one woman said, "They're finally cracking down on these frauds." Despite this, the woman, at the heart of it all, composed, graceful, never raising her voice, she wore leather flats and a navy blazer. She didn't plead, didn't quarrel. She just pulled out a set of legal paperwork from her leather folio, opened it, and waited. The bank employees were unaware that she had set off an encrypted alert against her .SMARTWS, a distress signal at the federal level. They were unaware that years of tactical experience were hidden behind those serene eyes. Field monitoring, training, and a database of classified names. For them, she was just another black woman whose check was too large. However, the FBI was familiar with her, as half of them were trained by her. And after 10 minutes and 5 minutes, the Bank of Hamilton's doors opened. When federal officials wearing full military gear entered, everyone anticipated an arrest. Phones emerged, gasps were whispered. With pride, the manager stood, arms folded, behind the bar as if he were going to be proven correct. However, rather than approaching her in handcuffs, the agents approached the glass room directly, stopped, and gave a salute, sharp, loud, in front of the whole lobby. At that moment, the truth hit home. Like a gavel, she entered the room. The woman they portrayed wasn't only a client. She served as the principal federal detective in a case that had been developing for several months. A financial crimes expert with direct authority from the dojo over examples of institutional discrimination. And now the same individuals who attempted to have her taken out were standing in infraction of several federal laws. There had been more than one miscommunication at the bank. This was the moment a system attempted to remove her and ultimately exposed itself in front of a camera still and a dozen witnesses recording silently from her briefcase. And believe me, there wasn't much silence in that clip. She had no intention offered her that bank with little more than a sense of urgency and serene assurance. The morning had been just like everyone else. Coffee at 6 a.m, 7 people, reviewing encrypted messages, and a last meeting with a DOJ task force prior to going downtown. Amira Cole was consistently accurate, always measured. Serving as a senior advisor for federal investigations, particularly, she was more aware than most of how easily bias may disguise itself in the context of systemic discrimination in corporate finance. According to protocol, she wasn't there as Agent Cole that morning. She was not showing off her badge or uttering names. She arrived as a legal settlement representative, managing a sizable transfer on behalf of Ongo that recently prevailed in a civil rights case against a significant real estate company. It was everything above board, everything was recorded. However, the bank hesitated as soon as she walked up to the counter. The building itself was antiseptic and glassy, and it was a flagship location uptown that catered to high-end customers. In a frame, the marble walls were adorned with certificates, and every desk appeared to have been cleaned twice for aesthetic purposes. As she got closer to the manager's desk, she became aware of the little change in the mood. The receptionist tensed up. A safeguard, the guard cocked his head in her direction, evaluating her without being hostile, like someone might do with a stranger who didn't fit right in. Calmly setting down her papers, she stated why she was there and asked to talk. Manager personally regarding moving the money into a legally secured account. The man who came out was precisely the kind she had been following over 6 investigations. Richard Hale was written on his name tag, but the tone in the voice read something different. Suspicion mixed with superiority. He welcomed her, raised an eyebrow before she finished her sentence. then looked swiftly at the check she was holding with a tight smile. Phrase, he said. I'm sorry, in a condescending tone that didn't even attempt to conceal itself. But this amount, well, it's highly unusual. We'll have to run a series of verifications, just protocol. That meant something to Amamira. Her documents showed no warning signs. The IRS number was the same. The routing and in the details were spotless. She wasn't just any old face with a 7F figure instrument either. Additionally, Richard Hale, like many others before him, he had a script that he fell back on when power in strange hands met discomfort. Our fraud prevention team needs to take a look at this. It might take some time. Slowly she nodded, not out of calculation rather than compliance. Then she noticed it. Richard turned. He took a phone out of his pocket, not his work line, and headed toward his desk, making a brief call in a low voice. She heard him answer, "Yeah," in a faint voice. "We have this as a different scenario. It might be forged. It could be identity fraud, just enough coded language to escalate things without naming anyone or making any outright allegations. Prior internal processing. It happened like this, nor with weapons nor with yelling, but with mistrust in business. Casual attire. And she was here for precisely that reason, not only for the move, but also to check if the trends her team had been identifying were true in this specific branch over several months. She allowed him to complete the call, let him guess. Each and every tiny camera built into the handle of her briefcase was recording her movements. A common problem for agents conducting stings activities that needed to appear to be civilian. A young black man, a junior employee, named Marcus, hesitantly walked over to her table. He apologized for the wait, handed her some water, and quietly placed a piece of paper beneath her cup. They called someone, it said. Not normal, Amamira said, looking up at him steadily outside the bank. After giving one nod, he vanished behind a line of cubicles. That proved it. This wasn't Marilyn regarding who she was. Her unit had been warning about this kind of institutional profiling. As soon as the system doesn't merely question your existence, it takes action to eliminate it. After 10 minutes, then 20, Amamira stayed sitting, her demeanor majestic, her posture unreadable. Customers came and went around her. Some people gazed, some muttered, and some took their phones out. She double-tapped the screen, checked her watch, and sent a silent transmission. The ping went directly to her group. Alert level 2. Potential escalation of bias, secondary group waiting. The badge was not something she wanted to play, not quite yet. She required the bank to Richard Hale was ready to fully reveal its hand. He was accompanied by 2 security officers and a woman from the risk compliance department. She was clearly uncomfortable. Richard said with an arrogant tone, "Miss Cole, we're going to have to postpone this transaction due to professional coldness. We've gotten in touch with federal authorities for your and our safety authorities to help with the verification process. For your own safety, please enter this chamber." A line intended to protect removing him from responsibility and portraying her as the danger. Amamira remained unflinching. She got up, collected her possessions, and entered the conference room with glass walls near the lobby side. Behind it, the door clicked. Her. She appeared to be a problem being contained from the outside. Within, she was laying the trap. After setting her briefcase on the table, she carefully opened it and spread out the papers, once more. The nonprofits. Authorization, the transfer approval, and the court order letter, sealed and signed. She scrawled one word on a notebook, pattern, and the address of the branch below it. This precise arrangement was taking place at the time in similar branches all throughout the nation. Clients who are brown and black exposed to public humiliation, suspicion, and escalation due to entirely lawful actions. She raised her head. A kid outside, curious. The glass chamber forced his face to the window. He was gently dragged away by his mother. At a later date? A different life. Amir may have felt insignificant at the time, but not now. She was right where she needed to be today. Richard Hale was pacing the floor outside the glass, looking at his watch as though he was anticipating something significant. Something to support the decision he had already taken. Although there was a gentle bustle of activity in the lobby, the tension was sufficiently thick to taste. Amira could see every aspect, every exit, and every reflection from inside. That she could observe without being noticed thanks to mirrored panels behind the teller booths. She watched as Richard gestured toward her as though she were a hazardous cargo and whispered to a uniformed guard, abandoned. Once more. The term volatile. Not in the way she spoke or behaved, but rather in the hue of her skin, in the sharpness of her gaze, in the silent accuracy of her movements. What Richard would later come to regret, not realizing that Amira Cole was more than just a blazer-wearing paper pusher. She had spent 3 running years, 4 entrenched in corporate crime investigations, and 7 years in tactical operations-level interagency response team simulations. Public directories did not include her name, and the majority of people in her clearance level was unknown to her own agency. She didn't promote authority, she utilized it. Additionally, this bank's exquisitely designed facade of institutionalized discrimination was a case file in movement. The wall-mounted telephone buzzed. Eyes widening, a staffer picked up before she looked across to Richard. Whispering, "They're here," she said. He adjusted his necktie like a man anticipating a round of applause. He straightened his jacket and strode toward the front entrance. 5 federal agents moved in formation through the big glass doors. 2 women and 3 males, all dressed in BLS, CKF, BI, tactical gear, neat writing. They couldn't read their faces. Their speed was accurate. Richard gave them an almost haughty nod in greeting. "I appreciate you approaching. To your right, in the conference room, is where she is. This is a high-value check that might be a fake ID. You should relocate swiftly. She hasn't cooperated." An eyebrow was raised by one of the agents. Boots remained silent. With the sound of boots on marble, they moved forward. Consumers Felkweet. Near the coffee counter, a young man raised his phone and pressed record. A mirror sat motionless inside the room. The agents went to the door. Agent Ramirez, the lead, opened it wide and unlocked it with a single swipe. Each agent paused, took a breath, and then stepped without saying anything. Inside, looked up at her and gave her a salute. The noise pierced the silence like thunder. The lobby echoed with gasps. One of the women dropped her handbag. A grin from Richard Hale fell into a shivering, pallid frown. In a whisper, one of the tellers said, "Wait, what?" However, misunderstanding was too late. Now that the truth was here, if had a DOJ clearance badge hidden under leather files and a blue blazer on, Ramirez said, "Ma'am," in a forceful voice. Amira said, "We're here at your direction. The floor is yours," as she stood. Slowly, each movement that is intentional. She repositioned her subtle, engraved, silver CUFFLINKS dot with the Department of Justice's seal, then looked at the glass wall, with one hand still gripping his phone. Richard stood motionless outside. Amira unlocked her own door. "Mr. Hale," she replied emphatically, "you made contact with federal agents to falsely imprison me. The call is currently being investigated by the federal government for discriminatory and king procedures and profiling. You will soon receive a formal subpoena." The lobby burst into activity, not in commotion but awakening. People took a step back, some started recording, others stared. She walked into the foyer like a woman, embarrassed to have assumed what Richard had so boldly portrayed. Verdict given down. Her presence shouted accountability, but her words were reserved. 3 months have been spent monitoring this bank because of a history of arbitrary holds, heightened identity checks, and denials of services aimed at black and brown customers. The event that occurred today was a data point, not an anomaly, and Richard stumbled. "Just check the pattern." "I was just following protocol." "No," Amira interrupted. "You made a decision, and so did I." Agent Ramirez gave an envelope to Marcus, who had been standing close to the back. "Behind her, your participation and documents will be handled under federal protection. And you are free to speak." Marcus nodded, his eyes shining with silent relief despite his tense jaw. Amira went back to Richard. "The next time you witness a black woman enter your bank with honor and documentation, you may want to consider whether you are the subject of the evaluation." Then, without bringing her up speech, without the necessity for handcuffs or clenched fists, she left, surrounded by federal authority and indisputable truth. The cameras continued to record. In less than 3 hours, it would go viral. And wherever in the nation where someone had been told they didn't look section, her tale would turn into a silent protest. As soon as Amira entered, the air in the bank changed outside the glass conference room, and she wasn't sure the center of attention, but nobody understood that she was more than just a woman with a valid check, that far than being the pinnacle. The salute was the first in a lengthy series of dominoes intended to reveal a whole system. Richard Hale was in disbelief, but without hesitation, Amira nodded to Agent Ramirez, who provided a subtle command and tapped his earpiece once. A woman in she stood up and presented her badge while sitting calmly in plain clothes in the waiting area close to the teller booths. She went over to a young Latina client who had just been turned down for a loan at the Civil Rights Division. Earlier, she whispered softly, "Ma'am, I'd want to ask you some questions on the way you were handled." Today, the woman nodded after blinking. Voice cracked. "My report is clean, but they said I didn't satisfy the credit level. 10 years of banking here, and everything was captured on camera?" Marcus, the junior banker, stepped ahead with trembling hands, carrying a manila folder with training materials, corporate emails, and market transactions, all of which demonstrate how Richard's branch routinely flagged minority clients for long overdue diligence. He gave it straight to Ramirez. "I kept everything, but I had to go no longer silent." A portable hard drive, which holds surveillance film, was taken out of a protective case by one of the agents, not only from today, but also from weeks of going to the same bank secretly. There were trends. Black clients with legal issues were depositing 5-figure checks without any problems, while white clients' Word documents were questioned, delayed, and in certain situations, asked to leave. They were releasing the cassettes as evidence today, and Amira had already seen them. Another manager, Erica, who was Caucasian, anxious, and in her mid-40s, came forward after hearing she acknowledged an oath that Richard had used terms like "doesn't look legitimate" and "might" in his earlier phone contact. Be using someone else's ID. Her voice trembled as she gazed into a mirror. "I didn't believe it would get this far, but I knew it was bad." An old black man in the lobby, a client named Walter, came up slowly with his cane and replied, "I don't know who you are. I brought a cashier's check for my retirement money here last year, Amira, and they held it for 11 days. They informed me I lost a real estate contract because they weren't at ease." His voice carried just the weight of 1,000 rejections. "Not anger, Amira Tukiar, not alone, sir. And this time, they don't get to handle his hand and nod. Conceal themselves behind documents." Outside, 6 Domino news vans started to arrive. With hashtags like #banking. The live feed from a bystander's phone had already surpassed 50,000 views and was still growing. The images of the FBI and Black Sting went viral on social media in a matter of minutes. Captions accompanying the agent's salute to Amira included, "This is how you eliminate systemic prejudice with evidence, not anger." Richard's phone kept buzzing. Corporate headquarters, HR, legal, and compliance messages came pouring in as the PR conflagration folded. His poise faltered, and he attempted to move away and blend into the background. Office, but Ramirez halted him. "This is a part of your deposition, so you'll want to stay right here, sir." Emma asked for the complete 6-month customer ledger. "The bank's recently arrived legal representative," he started to say. "That data is protected," but she interrupted him. Off. "You've already broken the rules of federal subpoenas. Stop once more, and I'll put an obstacle to fairness to your file. Should we go on?" Silence descended on the group as the attorney handed over the data. Agent Ramirez projected onto a screen that was pushed into the lobby a heat map that displays trends in discriminating transactions by zip code, all of which came from Richard's branch. Each dot revealed a story. Clusters showed delays and denials, with over 80% of them hurting consumers of race. A Mother business. Ona was reported for fraud, a student was rejected for tuition assistance, and a mortgage was denied. Amira faced the room and talked. Not only to the employees, but to every client and camera in the room. It's not about me or a check. Rather, it's about the way power is distributed. Silence. How systems are made to humiliate the competent while protecting the comfortable. Yet not, she paused. Today, the system was measured, recorded, and answered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to contact the FBI to arrest me. Instead, they took the brunt of it. In addition to the agents behind her. The screen's evidence and the witnesses in the they were louder than yelling in the room. This wasn't merely an accountability, it was a reckoning. The gravity of the situation didn't settle softly. It reverberated through all of the bystander cameras and every nook and cranny of that marble lobby. Through each internal Slack message at the corporate headquarters of the bank, the chamber surrounding Amira was bursting at the seams, but she remained quietly in authority. The glass walls, the gleaming, the magnitude of what had just been revealed was beyond the designer lighting and workstations. Paul Fenwick, a regional executive, arrived, breathless and with a heated face. After watching the live video, he hurried from the business headquarters 3 blocks away and stormed toward Amir's attempt to dominate the story. It appears that there was a miscommunication, he started. I can personally attest to that. Amira, however, turned away from him and spoke to the crowd. I'm not here. The only misconception is that repercussions can be negotiated after the harm has been done. I'm here to get your autographs. Mr. Fenwick, I apologize. After months of legal preparation with the DOJ and civil rights lawyers, she produced a contract. Called for mandatory bias audits, compensation for transactions that were unjustly delayed, and the resignation of management employees being investigated by the federal government. An Asian American teller named Kim In from behind the counter, a woman in her late 20s, responded, I've seen the soccer previously. I was informed that some profiles require more investigation and that I should not talk unless specifically ordered. I simply wanted to. Her voice broke and Amira gave a quiet nod. You won't lose your job, she said. For speaking the truth, yet it is no longer safe to remain silent. A brief but impactful moment. The room recognized that racism isn't the only thing that when racism becomes policy, it's loud. Richard Hale, who was now obviously perspiring, sought a final power grab. Since this is a private organization, you had no authority to monitor us without our consent. His remarks were urgent and empty. Ramirez stepped moving ahead. In fact, sir, you have been the subject of an investigation since Q1. Every action despite the fact that you obviously didn't read those documents. This was under federal jurisdiction and approved by your own board. Camera zoomed closer. Richard's face lost color, and an email notification ping. He flipped the screen to show Amira on Marcus' phone and gasped. They just promoted me. Effective immediately, he said, compliance officer. The bank was trying to seem good. Amira grinned a little, not because they had been promoted, but because they were finally responding rather than dominating. Is not always the result of compassion. Exposure can sometimes bring it. Then the last blow was delivered. A woman who had said nothing all along. I'm on the board, she said, standing and approaching Amira. She was elderly, immaculately dressed, and seated close to the entrance, silently. I saw this happen. I thought this location was real, but I can't no longer. She looked at the cameras. I left my job with effect from today. I, if necessary, testify before Congress. She indicated that trust is based on this. Is dying in this nation. She then left with her legacy and dignity. UNTRNISHED. Saved. The ensuing hush wasn't void. It was packed with responsibility, filled with a shared awareness that today's events were more than a simple sting operation. A mirror was held up. To a whole sector. The crowd outside had increased. Demonstrators were starting to congregate, but not by accident. Rather, we were prompted by signs that stated, Digna's not suspicious. Seen her standing erect. Amira went inside, collected her papers, and looked back at Marcus. Maintain the cleanliness of the records, defend those who raise their voices, and keep in mind that justice isn't always obvious. It occasionally enters with a briefcase and watches for a blink. When she left the structure, the agents, they didn't follow her like bodyguards. They trailed behind a commanding authority like troops. No handcuffs, no embarrassment, just authority utilized appropriately. Additionally, viewers, nationwide, who they weren't asking, why did this happen? But rather, how many people witnessed the story unfold in real time? Has it already occurred more times without a camera? However, they were unable to conceal it this time. The video had, by the time Amamira Cole entered the black SUV that was waiting outside, it had already gone viral. But it wasn't her who went. Viral.mission. At the structural level, accountability was. And that's precisely what got things started. Due to the bank was not merely a branch gone rogue, it served as a test site for a more comprehensive internal model that was implemented throughout 6 states, a risk assessment tool powered by AI that had been identifying minority client lead a startlingly out of proportion rate. Furthermore, Amamira hadn't simply entered Thebank holding a folder. 4 blocks away, a federal algorithm audit team had been waiting when she arrived. The instant that Richard Hale thought he was outwitting a threat when he called to report Amira, but he had unintentionally set off a the surveillance equipment that Amamira's crew had set up on the property weeks prior had a capture mechanism built into it. Each and every keystrokes made by employees, each transaction that has been highlighted, and each internal note evidence with the label enhanced screening was now admissible in court. The DOJ's so-called biasing neutral system had picked up its bigotry from those who created it, the golden ticket. Instead of debriefing, Amamira went back to headquarters too short. Within a few hours, she was speaking with senior officials via secure video call at Thetwo Congressional Oversight Committees, the Department of Justice, and the Office of the Currency Controller. As she presented her findings, the room became silent. Screens with adjacent heating maps, denial logs, and corporate training materials that demonstrate how employees were urged to assess nonverbal indications for high-value transactions and code for covert profiling. The twist then appeared, one not even her own team had anticipated it. While going through internal correspondence, Amamra learned that Richard Hale wasn't playing by himself. He had been a member of an unofficial task force. Senior Supervisor Schwo had set up a covert signal conversation called Eagle Watch across several branches. The group traded names, images, and security footage of their suspect minority clientele. A 12-year-old black youngster depositing scholarship funds was one of the viral photos. The following caption, the thread's title was "Check This Little Genius. Sure, he didn't hustle it." Featured laughing emoticons and the regional VP, who had arrived earlier and was the most active chatterbox that day while feigning horror. With that in hand, Amamira took action. She worked with the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ to simultaneously issue a federal subpoena to 17 branches throughout 5 states. Numerous complaints had been filed against each of them, and each one had recorded instances of clients of color experiencing inexplicable delays or denials. However, rather than using physical force to knock on doors, Amamira's team used digital warrants and congressional supt. The technology that had allowed Richard Hale and others to function one by one without repercussions started to disintegrate in public deliberately, and irrevocably. The headlines and salutes were covered by the media, but the actual harm, the type spreadsheets, audits, and testimony that don't follow the trend, the type that reorganizes institutions under oath. Within a day, Richard Hale was fired. However, that was insufficient. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act was used by Amamira to file civil penalties, exposing the bank to hundreds of millions of dollars in legal debt. She collaborated with the ACLU and NAACP to establish a nationwide hotline, where customers can directly report instances of financial discrimination. To her task force. Within a week, thousands of calls came in. Lawyers for class actions mobilized. Journalists unearthed old tailies that no one had previously taken seriously. Amamira then gave a sworn statement during a Senate Banking Committee televised hearing. Calm, accurate, and terrible. She described the situation in detail as well as the system that led to it, the tech bias, the suspicious culture, the incentive. programs that paid employees for identifying high-risk customers without adequate supervision. She put an end to her testimony that would be repeated over and over on news cycles for days. One woman at one bank wasn't the issue here. This was about a pattern, a system that educates professionals to call their fear while hiding its prejudice. In policy.protocol, but what they forget, the law remembers. A person's skin does not gain them that honor. Furthermore, justice is not optional in a nation that prides itself on being free. There was stillness in the room. The senators themselves, many of whom had attempted to deflect, postpone, and minimize financial discrimination, were at a loss for words. Later that night, the CEO of the bank issued a statement acknowledging significant operational shortcomings and declared the dismissal of more than a dozen managers and executives. In a single day, the stock fell 17%. The DOJ declared a more thorough examination of biased AI in banking. Additionally, Amamira didn't stay 4 years. Rather, she met Marcus in private in a tiny cafe 2 blocks away from the bank. He appeared more composed and less terrified. Justice is not the only issue, no longer, he stated. Amamira nodded and said, "It's about building something better." She folder was slid across the table. A federal fellowship offered to work as a compliance strategist for the DOJ was enclosed. Startled, he blinked. She grinned and said, "You're giving me a seat at the table? I'm supplying the design blueprints for its redevelopment." Suddenly, the system that attempted to keep her quiet turned into the starting point for something new. The press conference wasn't the end of it. It didn't culminate in litigation, resignations, or even viral videos. Amira Cole's actions that day weren't only about exposing the decay within one bank. Its purpose was to reveal a truth, therefore many have endured years of silent, agonizing life. In actuality, when the room doesn't value you, decency has always been optional. However, on that day, the room had to acknowledge her presence, salute her, and see her. Long after the headlines had faded, the video continued to play. 1,000 reposts, 1 million views. However, who watched wasn't the most important factor. Who felt it? The woman with impeccable credit who sobbed quietly in her car after being turned down for a house loan. The young man whose over the course of 6 months, the business account, was audited 4 times at random. "Where did you get this money?" was the question posed to the teenage girl who opened her first savings account. For them, Amamira's narrative wasn't amusing. It was acknowledgement. It demonstrated that someone possessed the authority, the skills, and the courage to enter the flames and transform it into a mirror. She didn't do it for the acclaim, though. She wished to avoid becoming a symbol. Symbols are inscribed in stone, and eventually forgotten, sure to change. Systemic, silent, and unrelenting change. Additionally, a black woman's refusal to drop her voice, even when the room tries to do so, can occasionally be the most radical thing she can do, act as though she doesn't belong. "They think the badge makes me dangerous, but it's not," she once said to a buddy. She recalls every tale they rejected and every policy they called, which is what makes me dangerous, indifferent each time they tighten the bureaucratic noose around someone's throat while grinning. You may be wondering what happened to the bank. And now the world does too. It is currently governed by the federal government, and its AI systems are being completely redesigned using civil rights advisors and openness. Its leaders have been replaced by those who recognize that racism is intentional, and that Marcus is more than just a compliance officer. He has emerged as a key figure in the DOJ, spearheading innovative training initiatives that instruct financial organizations on how to spot and eliminate discriminatory behaviors from the ground up. You will find Amamira where the next silence needs to be broken, not on Instagram or at TD lectures, for the fight really starts when the cameras stop recording, not when it stops. And if you're still watching this film, consider this. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated as though they belong merely based on their appearance? Did you say anything or keep quiet? Because tales like this, they go viral because they capture a genuine emotion that we all experience. Not just because they're shocking, yet are frequently too afraid to identify. Therefore, don't let this tale fade into simply another headline. Talk about it, share it, and let it be the start of something larger. Subscribe to Radio Life Stories for more compelling stories that reveal the truth, question established structures, and serve as a reminder that justice is a choice rather than merely a term. Because sometimes the person they didn't anticipate is the most powerful person in the room.